Good evening and welcome to the New York Society Library, the oldest library in the city, now celebrating our 270th anniversary. And tonight we welcome Gregory Pardlo, who will be speaking about his newest collection of poetry, Spectral Evidence, Poems. The library has always welcomed poets. In fact, Walt Whitman met Emerson at the library. So take a look around. You never know who you're going to meet here. Gregory Pardlo's previous collection, Digest, won the 2015 Pulitzer Prize for Poetry. He is also the author of Air Traffic, a memoir and essays, and Totem. His poems and essays have appeared in The New Yorker, American Poetry Review, The New York Times, and elsewhere. Other honors include fellowships from the New York Public Library's Cullman Center, the Guggenheim Foundation, the New York Foundation for the Arts, and also the National Endowment for the Arts. Mr. Pardlo is poetry editor at Virginia Quarterly Review and co-director for the study of global racial justice at Rutgers University, and a visiting associate professor in literature and creative writing at NYU and Abu Dhabi. And now, let us welcome Mr. Pardlo.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for coming out. I appreciate it. It's good to see some friends in the house. And this is something of a homecoming. It feels very much like a homecoming. I did a lot of my work in this library, and so I was really grateful to be invited to share this book, this collection. In fact, I remember before we moved to Abu Dhabi, actually before the pandemic, I was upstairs in one of the corners. I like to find a little nook to write in, and I heard one of the librarians, they take tours, right? They give tours to prospective members, and as they're walking through, I heard, and the Pulitzer Prize-winning poet Gregory Pardlo actually wrote some of his memoir here. And I was just like, oh. So this feels very much a homecoming for me. Okay, so this book, I'll tell you the kind of broad overview. I was thinking about the police officer Darren Wilson, who shot Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri in 2013. When he was in his deposition, he described, first of all, Michael Brown and Darren Wilson are exactly the same height and exactly the same weight. And during his deposition, he described Michael Brown as a demon rising up before him. And he said when Michael Brown put his hand on his arm, he felt like a rag doll in the hands of Hulk Hogan. And so I thought, well, this is, why the recourse to such supernatural descriptions? Of course, intuitively we understand why. But then I was curious to see how common this was, and I started looking at other depositions of the sadly many similar instances. And very often the police officer would take recourse to some supernatural description of the person they killed. And so it occurred to me that in these cases, the court system becomes this kind of machine for processing fear, right? Taking the fear and legitimizing it and inscribing it in law and making it real. In other words, magic. Where have we seen this before? Well, the Salem witch trial. Well, the witch trials in general all throughout Europe and 16th, 17th century Europe and America, the United States. So I started looking at witch trials and the logic of witch trials, and of course, yes, it is the fear that animates the charge of witchcraft. Right? I was afraid that this person would harm me, or I believed that this person did harm me, and therefore the law, my ability to accuse them as being a witch, corroborates my fear and makes it true. right? And that person gets hung, and sadly, again, many people got hung. So I wanted to think about the logic of witchcraft and the contemporary extrajudicial killing of black and brown people, and the connection between the way we monsterize women as well, right? And so this kind of contemporary impulse, not only to say I'm unlike this person and this person is strange and other and different, but that person, because of their difference, means me harm. And that seems to me a step that is particularly pernicious. So that's the logic of the book. Of course, the poems go all over the place from there, but that was the kind of impulse that I was thinking through. I'll start with a poem that speaks to this idea a bit. Do you all know who Tituba was? Some of us know. So Tituba was the enslaved woman who, during the Salem witch trials, when the two little girls were afflicted, and they had seizures, and they said, well, Tituba bewitched us. And so Tituba, being an enslaved woman, did not occupy the same kind of space in the eyes of the law, and therefore, I speculate, this was part of the reason that she, out of all of the people who were hung, was not hung. Also, she had a very smart strategy when she went to court, and that was she confessed. And in the process of confessing, she named her co-conspirators. So, this is called a cult. Zero your scales to the burden of a lash, dear justice, but let Tituba clumsy the magistrate's mind with a wag of her wizened index. A flight risk near the forests of the Wampanoag, where Christians savaged Queen Huidamo's corpse. What else Tituba, non-white and woman, haunt but a margin of error? She's a catbird's song trapped in the chimney. She's egg whites in water. She is the tumescence of smoke. Dear Mami Wata, let Tituba prove to be the stone that splits the stream of their vision. Let her renounce sight and be unseen. Let her cough ground coral in the shedding of a pewter moon, that she, of all the innocents, should live. Dear three-headed Hecate, replace her, the unthought thought, with wax, twigs, horsehair, and straw. Let her not appear as a witness, nor as evidence. As with the talking dog, let her be the hoodoo that speaks through their mirrors. Let a hang-thread skein of yarn ghost the floorboards, tempting a red cat, his familiars, the devil, and his counsel, the canary. Let her conjure the man in black they fear, who charms pilgrims on the road to paradise, disguised as a harmless birdwatcher. Dear Nemesis, let her feed the court a few names from his register, a taste of her truth, her mise en abîme, her one hell that calls forth another. With no standing on her own behalf, let her sit in judgment. Let this power invested of gavel and oath help her give birth through her mouth like a god. So the book is made up of several series of poems. And so I'll read a couple from each of the series, one of which is a series called Theater Selfie. And this is kind of self-explanatory, I hope. Theater Selfie. At Richard Rodgers Theater, I shrank my face to the box office window and confessed to the Lucite's voice vent that I'd told my wife a lie. I had hidden no Christmas gifts in the basement, nor yet acquired tickets to Hamilton for my youngest, as I'd boasted I would. Oblivious to cost, I was now a hostage to the season and my ego, forced to drain the ATM for my deliverance. The ticket guy pshawed and, like a chilly neighbor, acknowledged me enough to punctuate his snub. But the seat map online, I pleaded, showed several vacant dots in March. No seats, he snapped. And we went on like this until I looked it up on my phone. Those, he snarled, you can't. His pause, its meaning irretrievable now, was heavy with the ghosts of Broadway's sins. It was as if a voice off stage was force-feeding him the line, you can't afford those. His cheeks ripened to prove he'd heard it just as I'd heard it, but that, this time, maybe, he'd heard it in the way that I'd heard it. Face frozen, his eyes went floodlight, making me suddenly reel. The veil had fallen between us, and we two stood outside the magic. We were our only audience. As one trained in this hackneyed improv, I knew I might dress the specter of his fear in comedy to save him. I needed to draw him out of his head. You got kids? I asked. He nodded, but I needed to hear the emotion in his voice. What are you going to do, huh? I laughed. It's like, what do you want from me, am I right? And he mirrored me, shaking his head, the things we do. He asked if I could bring my kid next Tuesday. Hells yeah, I said, careful to stay in character, though I wasn't sure where he was taking us. He bent to root beneath his desk. Then the lucite spit 2 miracles he must have set aside for someone else. The selfie we took that day tells a partial story. You see us, all teeth and safe as bros. You see me, holding the tickets like a peace sign, but you could never guess the price we paid to get them. Thanks. And I'll read one other. There are 3 of the theater selfie poems, all kind of connected around this story of taking my daughter to see Hamilton. Theater selfie. Every seat from heaven to the mezzanine envied ours. 7th row orchestra, leash limit of the real. Hashtag blessed. Hashtag living the dream. Smug polite, we shouldered down the aisles, choked with tourists busy puppy sneezing their cell phone cameras, mostly at themselves. Because our tickets were a Christmas solid, house seats at $80 apiece, I hope to dodge whichever goddess taketh away from those who make parade floats of their fortunes, and kept my selfie game turned low, just the shot of our thumbs, mine dingy-nailed and elephant-skinned, the kids kid-sized and glossy as the ticket stubs and playbill we held like proof of life against the backdrop of the stage. Meanwhile, a voice, perhaps the goddess from the machine, declared all photos were forbidden, which made me think of footage smuggled from the tender-age cages of McAllen, Texas, and made me fear our souvenir selfie might be frisked from my phone by jackbooted ushers, and the photo's faceless humility proven moot in the lineup of falsely modest feeds, replete with my bathroom body cropped headless as a saint, or with the phone shielding my face like a misplaced fig leaf. My friends' tattoo selfies with their cellophane frames of skin pigmented like storefront church windows, faceless but doubly begging for breaking on the wheel or whatever punishment suits the sin of branding oneself to make oneself a brand. One of many reasons one should never send unbidden photos of man junk. They fail to fascinate in the way the phallic amulet Romans called fascinus might, worn to ward off invidia, aka the evil eye, but they do invite the curse that wipes the member from the body politic. There is no hiding from the closed circuit karma obscura, which might be reason enough to unburden ourselves of all things hidden, to make our lives transparent as a middle schooler's backpack. I like to think I gave my kids, even as their profiles etched in clouds, their data pollen green and fossiled onto motherboards, even as the future makes the past impossible to escape, blank slates on which they could imagine selves the world has never seen. But the values we christen them with are subliminal trackers meant to keep them homing to their first fold and assuage the fears their mom and I hold of that proverbial white van, dope-dealing ice cream man, the predatorial piper whose domestic terrors are fought with thoughts and prayers. How can I teach them to live with joy, their hearts unshuttered and vulnerable, when, as I admired each in turn their God-kissed newness cupped like chicks in the car carrier home from the hospital, I considered spitting in their faces, as one neighbor insisted in her native brogue a parent must do with a child that is too beautiful, early humiliation preempting future envy for her own good. Is it possible a neighbor could love my kids as if they were hers while I disguise my fear as care and hope my silence inoculates them against jealous gods, hope my absence from the selfie will exempt them from the crappy roles I've had to play in this American cast? That fear masking a more primal one, that I can't spiritually afford these tickets and am unworthy of their love. For what could I do but fear when life's theater is full of ghosts and mirrors and baleful peacock feathers? How do I not make worthiness the measure? How do I prevent my specters and dreams of childhood from upstaging the child? The patron saint of this book is Saint Teresa Avila. She's actually the patron saint of poets, which I did not know when I became obsessed with Saint Teresa Avila. I became obsessed with her because she's herself a poet and theologian. She's depicted by Bernini in the famous sculpture, The Ecstasy of Saint Teresa. She founded monasteries all over the place and was just absolutely badass. But the thing that impressed me the most is that she would pray, she would concentrate so deeply that she would levitate. And I just thought that was fantastic. So she appears in various forms throughout the book. This is called nunsploitation. Teresa Avila buzzes me in, then makes me leave my shoes in the foyer before I enter the Upper East Side tabernacle of shame she calls a therapist's office, where she divines the truths disguised by my confessions. As my bare feet cross the cold parquet, dark and cloven to a sticky rhythm, Teresa asks if I'm still tempting the goat paths that rim the ravine my passions trickle into. It's true. I'm in love with my therapist. Blame the saint's books that hearken from half a millennium away. I love her unattainable intimacy, her use of my inner ear to give goosebumps on the brain. The voice that is and is not Teresa's channels canticles and conjures woodcut illustrations of my beloved, sprouting poems from her desk at Valladolid. Above her, a dove thought winging through numinous yonder break. Teresa, and Teresa, and Teresa, in concert, fanning out in imitation of a Hindu god. You'd expect compassion from someone who gentled her mind inside 7 mansions of prayer while feeding flames her love letters to keep them from prying eyes. Instead, she saint-splains the dangers of transference, as if I never noticed my itch to project the idea of one thing onto the figure of another. As if professing love to my therapist meant only to mask my mommy issues. And anyways, isn't that a bit sanctimonious coming from someone saving her love for a father figure whose image reflects the sum of all creation? A love so consuming, Her inside song reached the cistern's ears glued to her office door, song quoting an erotic elan, a harmony of relation, probing the mystery of self-love, which is, of course, where love begins. Ipso facto, love is nothing but transference. Love is squeezing people's feet into fetishes we've schlepped hill and vale since memory, like moonlight, was the surplus of a previous life. To have come this far, across the park, through ramble and glade, knowing the glass slipper would fit almost any old foot I put in it, let the bean counters of love call that transference. Let them name this affliction what they will, as if diagnosis were a cure. Let them tabulate salvation. Tell me how many hair shirts and unanswered hungers. Tell me how many shoeless steps to beatitude. Since I mentioned the Upper East Side, let's stay there. What's that? Or here. Let's stay here. This is called Supernatural Bread. Lexington Avenue tugged the bus to East Hampton like a joke dollar bill just out of reach each time I neared it, having missed its stop at 77th, and chased it to the next, which I hoped would be 69th, but had to bet on 66th when the curtain of traffic drew back to show its brake lights squint, a wounded beast retreating. But I gave chase, as if I myself were pursued by zombified regrets hot on my heels, nostalgic for my undoing, though it wouldn't, the bus, in fact, stop until it reached the curb at 59th, after I'd slalomed bodies under the Hunter College jet bridge, got beyond the aromatic reach of halal carts and the Greek grill truck, caterers to immigrants, catalysts of class mobility, as a mist slicked my rucksack, plus the duffel I had packed, because there is no night bus back to Manhattan, and I'd had to stay the night out there, where it was more like New England than New York. But every border is a false horizon, a dream of the Red Sea's righteous discretion. In East Hampton, I roomed in an 18th century farmhouse, the restoration of which was overseen by this owner guy who badmouthed universities as hotbeds of treason, professors consumed by hatreds that have no source. But I was probably okay, he allowed, as a poet. That is, someone whose art is impartial and should, he said, like a good education, make nothing happen. He talked of sovereignty and his frustration with landmarking, the illusion that one's environment can be arrested in time to appoint the land as a shared ancestor, its immortal aura enameled by the law. But his complaint outlined the injustice that laws could limit his use of his property based on rumors, as he called them, the unrecorded oral record that the farmhouse once harbored fugitives, from before the Civil War, he said, gesturing to antiquity, time before memorial. And I saw them, haunting, forever tied to this place. And I thought to ask him, why euphemize slavery as if uttering the word might revive a statute of limitations like a covenant on the land we occupied? Haven't we progressed? His question rattles the great chain of being, its eugenic agenda, and the botched ontology it describes. But I held my tongue and harbored in my head the weary travelers chasing liberation, which by nature has to lurch just out of reach each time it gets precipitously close to revealing itself as the mere abstraction that it is. The way even the harbor in my mind reduced the fugitives' lives to an allegory of my own, as if we'd together received all tomorrow's blessings in catching the coach that moseyed down Lex, as if, indeed, the very pachyderm of time itself would have left a bus-shaped door in the rain, the threshold of the future neither coming into view nor losing focus, the living thread of our connection being the divine imagination that runs among us and through us without end. So let's see. I will read. I had a poem recently in the New Yorker. When your friend is the poetry editor of the New Yorker, you kind of get suspicious about how easy it is to get up the poem. When he takes one, it's like, is that the kind of nepotism I always decried, the kind of insiderism that I always thought was what was wrong with the poetry world? But anyway, here we are. It's a business. It's a business. I mean, the wheels got to turn. I'm grateful, though. Dragonflies. When my nephew pudges with his saggy pumpkin face, and I think maybe it's his mouth he's got around some gewgaw from the floor, I want to pry his trap open, but he won't budge. It's like his lips are sewn shut in some horror flick affliction, which is so freaking cute, I wish I could Cookie Monster his whole head. He gets it from our side, his mouth almighty, for we Pardlo men have been known to show less sense than appetite. Pop claimed I used to hum and protest the final bars of the Marseillaise, or at least that's what he heard when attacked by dragonflies, as he called it, as in, that boy got the dragonflies, the kind fictive as the boogeyman, needles stitching shut the pie holes of chatterboxes and tattletales, having mesmerized the brats like flying spoons of tapioca. I used to zip it as if I had Houdini in there, or like my tongue was busy putting boat knots in phantom maraschino stems. Boy looks like a monkey on a cupcake, the old man would say. None of which rings true, but he swore it's true. None of which rings a bell, but he swore it's true, my face. I must have worn that foolish grin to death, as every hunger in our house was second to his, my old man, fearing, perhaps like Goya's Saturn, his dominions decline, and though he'd taunt me, refused to let him see me cry. Read a couple other daddy poems since I'm on that train. Yeah, this is from a series called the Essay on Fidelity. 6. My father, Bacchus, wanted a daughter instead of me. He felt the threat a son implies, and took you, my infant virility, scarf skin like a halo, angel of my innocence, forefledged. Before the ritual, there was guilt. You were vestigial as the divot beneath my nose, where the angel pinched my lips in binding silence. Would I see myself in style or fit if I encountered you, my soul, draped like a lost mitten on the fence post, tattered as a moth-eaten turtleneck, hood like the hood of a headsman? If you were reappended, would you lisp like chiffon or crunch like corduroy? You are the macho my father's dream foretold, he who, in the end, was like a son to me, whose own member circumscribed a foreshortened life story mine was intended to resemble. My forebear, the brutal gardener. He who conjured the corona must have foreseen his own eclipse, and standing on ceremony, found at hand a means to get my sex to bleed. How are we doing? Great. Jen, yeah? Okay. All right, so I'll read a couple more, and then we'll begin our descent. All right. Sorry, this brand new book. I'm still trying to find the right pathways through it. Poppies, supernatural bread. All right, so I'll read the other nunsploitation poem. You're familiar with the Bernini's Ecstasy of St. Teresa? Yeah, okay, excellent. Okay. This makes it so much easier. Nunsploitation. Oh, I do want to say, so my preoccupation with this poem was that, in this historical moment, it is distasteful, put that mildly, for example, for a man to write in the voice of a woman, right? And so I was really interested in and perplexed by how taken I was by Bernini's The Ecstasy of St. Teresa. Of course, Bernini bases the depiction of St. Teresa on her own writing, right? She describes this experience where the angel pierces her soul, her heart, with this spear. But it's nonetheless a man depicting a woman in throes of ecstasy. And I was really just kind of confronted by the politics of that, right, from his period to our period, our time. Okay, so that's kind of the background question that I'm dealing with. Nunsploitation. But for that iron's point blushing, O Lord, like a cautery tool for the wounded soul, the marble and bronze idols, an engine of reverence and tourism, Bernini distills as ecstasy. This concupiscence, this tantric sneeze. Could Bernini have rendered a pleasure, Lord, not got at the end of a spear? The highest angel haunted Teresa Avila like a Motown hook and prodded her body quiverish with love's heartburner, a rapture fantasy fathomed by her innermost yoga. Her spirit burst forth, O Lord, like a jelly jar full of lightning bugs clumsied from my handlebars. Beneath the hoodie, her head lolls sweetly with the funk of that agony glorioso, which, if you don't know, now you do, because Bernini lifted Teresa's story, Lord, like a shipwreck from its ecclesiastical groove, and mimicked her signature miracle, levitation, which she murmured into her sackcloth and wimple. He left Teresa's left foot exposed, as if to bait, a bedside tidbit, the devil, for whom she had no fear, for he appeared to her toy-sized and black, and dropped by to make her pound air with laughter, all weightless, all risen by pinch and tickle until she wet him with holy water. Lord, tell me that empathy, like art, is useless and necessary, that Bernini's inspiration is more than a contact high. Whatever he named it, Lord, this bone-still cinema, this Spartan delight, forgive him. Forgive us all, Lord, we lesser creators who conflate our subjects' demons with our own. Okay. Yep. Metaphor. To transfer or carry. As a man might carry his namesake in his arms or on his shoulders, cheering, "We bad, we bad," as my father did when he saw himself in me. As I came of age, however, I thought my father was, in the sense that means to hamper or impede, an embarrassment, which is, as all language is essentially, a metaphor. I.A. Richards says a metaphor consists of a tenor and a vehicle. My father would point out that he's using a metaphor to define metaphors, a literalization like the relic to the corpse. Like when Richards asks himself if a wooden leg is a metaphor for a wooden leg. My dad, Gregory Pardlo Sr., before he died, lost his leg to diabetes. Even though he himself would be the only person to see it, he insisted that the prosthesis precisely match his skin tone. This is the same guy who gave me a Hot Wheels car for Christmas. A joke, see? He promised me a car when I turned 16. It shimmers on my desk now, a kitschy muse with shark's teeth decals behind the wheel wells. Before he died, I told him I would have preferred a Matchbox car packaged in an actual matchbox, literalizing the figurative commingling of tenor and vehicle, more metonym than metaphor, a pedigree, in other words. He told me to get the stick out of my ass. Greg Pardlo is dead. Long live Greg Pardlo. Convertible. My pop let me steer when I was small enough to snug between his belly and the wheel. Any random intersection, he might hoist me across the handbrake onto his lap to pilot the wagon before returning me to earth. As I got older, he'd make me steer while he lit a smoke or shed his jacket. His ashes arrived in a cardboard carton with shipping labels and barcode, heavy enough to trigger the seatbelt alarm as we clipped home, honeysuckle in the air, from the post office. A reasonable person would have put the box on the floor, but you know already, don't you? I held him in my lap. You're mine, I told the box of dad dust, lifting my hands occasionally, reckless to the wind, tempting the evening, swinging our private chariot of steel and bone. Okay. Two more. Is that right? Yeah? Go ahead. An old husband's tale reckons that witches are children of sexless angels and their human eunuchs, angels whose self-restraint was inversely proportional to the power to silence their victims, papa's maybes of a Zeus-like ravishment from above, immaculate. Paul said women should wear an authority on their heads, by which he meant a veil, like a force field, to protect them from lustful angels. Adam copped angel lust from those self-same freaky mayflies who, by turns, learned their grift at God's extensive digit bulbing like molten glass at the end of a blowpipe. God got his from Greeks. Thus completes, like a network of shell companies, the history of qualified immunity. Every man should learn to balance a set of books that looks like an anvil instead of a veil on our heads for posture in the figurative sense, standing in God's eyes where God, like the future, is female, a prophylactic against patriarchy, a cork stopper in the mouth of a gun. The swear jar isn't empty. The swear jar isn't empty. Full of flowers instead of coins, it curses a bouquet of love-me-nots, a tangled vine of credit extended to one most likely to default. Such a trifling bargain, flowers for mercy. Oh, nature, predatory lender, risk is the commuter bus I ride between damnation and wonder, arrival and departure marking the same location. Give me chastity, O Lord, as the Berber saint says, but stitch my wounds loosely, for miracle and sin are kindred. Both are hatched from a broken law. The famous Negro athlete doubts the planet is round and ripe. Its magnetic navel adrift escapes like leaves turned dryly underfoot. The moon, so immense you could smell its breath, demands its sugar like your great Aunt Ginny. A flame deflates atop a skull. Swisher sweet, this scent. So many flies. Eluard writes, "The earth is blue like an orange. Watch it tremolo, as on a globetrotter's finger, in the smoke-filled soap bubble that dances iridescent in space. She aims the embered butt of her cigarette at the moon in a puddle. Its extinction makes the sound of nothing but net." I'll end there. Thank you. Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks. So we have time to chat a little bit? Or?
Yeah, if that works for you, that's great.
Absolutely, yeah. Yes.
I was wondering how old you were when you got interested in poetry, and who were the first poets that you liked?
So that's obviously it's a complicated question, but it's complicated in the sense that, hello. Come in. Really? Sorry, I called attention to you. I know you wanted to make a quiet entrance. Sorry. So the question was, how old was I when I got interested in poetry, and how did that whole thing happen? My mother was an artist. She was a commercial artist. She worked for, I don't know if anyone here remembers, the Yellow Pages.
Of course. So embarrassing.
She was an artist for the Yellow Pages. And so what happened was the salespeople would go out into the field. It would go to the plumber's office, for example, a plumber, and would sell the ad, so they'd sell an ad, and they would get all the information from the plumber that the plumber wanted to be in the ad. No, so they did not sell the ad yet. They talked to the plumber, and part of their sales technique was they would have an ad mocked up in order to show the plumber what their ad could look like. And so the salesperson would get the information, then go back to the art department of the Yellow Pages, describe, they would take notes and say, this is what the ad should look like. My mother was one of the artists who would produce the ad based on their descriptions. I started describing images that I wanted my mother to draw. And then she would, and this was, as you can imagine, a very beautiful memory and an endearing moment of bonding between me and my mother. And so I did not know that what I was doing was writing poems as I described what I saw and wanted to see created. So I was writing poems long before I understood what it was I was doing. And there's another moment I want to share. Many years later, someone had asked me this very same question, and I forget what the circumstances were, but for some reason in that moment, I just remembered, I was like, Robert Louis Stevenson, A Child's Garden of Verses. Why am I thinking about this book? And after the event or the interview, whatever it was, I went and called my mother and I said, do you know this book? She said, of course, we read it every night. I love that book. And so there was this foundation that I had clearly both taken for granted and just, relegated to my subconscious. But poetry had been in my life in profound ways. And And then to put a point on your question, it was when I discovered that girls like poetry. Sorry. Not signified answer. One would hope, but positive reinforcement was there. Yes.
Did I hear that you lived in Addis Ababa or you lived in some
Abu
exotic
Dhabi.
places?
Abu Dhabi, yes.
Abu Dhabi.
I took a 3-year leave to take a visiting gig at NYU has a campus in Abu Dhabi. It's in the United Arab Emirates. So I'm in the Middle East. And I was just saying that life is very easy in Abu Dhabi. The wealth there's a lot of money there and the lifestyle is very easy. I say that, but it's also the case that I know the cost that comfort comes at, right? Both to the environment and to the labor that provides the comforts that I enjoy while I'm there. And so it's a complicated, again, relationship. But it's so interesting being outside of the United States and particularly teaching the liberal arts in an authoritarian state, right? There's this push-pull of trying to get my students to think independently and creatively and knowing that we all exist in a place that has very clear lines as to how creative and independent one can actually express
Was your
those
family
thoughts.
with you?
We all moved out. Yeah, we all moved out there. My older daughter graduated from high school, graduated from the American school in Abu Dhabi last year. And my younger daughter goes to Cranleigh, the British school that's out there. Well, there are many British schools actually. There are many French schools and German schools and Russian schools. At least 80% of the population are expats. So, yeah, it's a very westernized country. Life is not, other than at this time of year, the stunningly beautiful weather. It's very much like sadly, there are a lot of similarities between life here and life there. There are books that you can't get a hold of, and there are histories that can't be taught, and then there's life in Abu Dhabi.
You write this book mostly there or no?
No, actually, this book, as evidenced by the Upper East Side and Lexington Avenue, was, I think, primarily a pandemic book. So I had the Cullman Fellowship, which the New York Public Library has a 9-month-long fellowship where they give me an office and you have access to all of the resources of the library. Mine was during the pandemic. And so all of the Cullman Fellows, we had basically employee status in the library, but the library was closed to the public. And so I would go in, I was one of the few fellows who actually went into their office, and I would go in and I had the place practically to myself, that entire building. So of course I would go up into the Rose reading room and run real fast down the middle of the room and slide across the floor. These things, when are you gonna have an opportunity to do that? So I was very, very grateful for my time there. But back to the point of your question, the other upside, not just getting to slide across the floor, was that the librarians did not have a lot of work to do. And so they were very eager to jump into my project with me, and they were just fire hosing, resources at me all day long. And so it was a blast.
Research assistants.
Research assistants, absolutely. And well, I felt like I was the research assistant really, because they were just like, here, do this, read this. Oh, you must see this. Okay, all right.
Wow.
I'm trying to keep up. Yeah, it was fabulous.
Oh.
Well, one more. Let's
Yeah,
go.
please.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Please.
I'm curious about the New York Society Library and your experience here. You mentioned working in one of the nooks, stairs. Does the setting inform your work? Or do you escape from the world, as many writers do when you come in?
Yeah, I think the latter. But I tell you something that I would not say in any other circumstance. Would probably deny ever having said it. But the fifth floor, there's a concentration there where everybody is working and deeply focused. There's something that happens that is, you know, generative. And so I remember working there and just feeling like I was stepping into a tide and being carried away on the focus and concentration. I was one of the jerks that would shush people all the time. And tell people like, your headphones are a little too loud. Do you mind? So I didn't make many friends, but it was a really productive time. Go for it, yeah.
A question about the reading. Thank you for that reading. That was great.
Thank you.
One of the things that, as you went through the poems is, it's hard to tell how the form of the poem, were these mostly prose poems or are they?
No. I'm very conscious of the lineation of the line break. I'm very conscious of internal rhyme. I'm very conscious of the kind of puns that are in, so which you could not see, for example, in the convertible poem with the Dad's Ashes, right? So the line, he would make me steer while he lit a smoke or shed his jacket. And then the next line is his ashes arrived, right? And so there's kind of the play like that, which I recognize you may not, you're not going to hear it in a reading, but I am very conscious of how the poem is organized on the page. Thank you. Thank you.
Sorry, I just was gonna, I read an interview that I think you did with LitHub.
Sure.
Or, yeah.
Oh, recently.
Recently,
Yeah.
yes. Where you talked about tennis, among other things.
Yeah.
And it reminded me of one of my favorite random essays by the playwright Tony Kushner, where he describes making a lasagna and how it's a metaphor for writing a play. And I wonder if tennis and poetry work as metaphors of each other in some way that's useful to bring up, or?
Absolutely, 1000%. But I'm trying to decide whether, I think you point out an interesting tension, whether poetry is a metaphor for tennis or tennis is a metaphor for poetry. I think they're symbiotic. I can't imagine how a poet could work without being a tennis player. Is that possible?
How about basketball?
Basketball? No, basketball doesn't. No, basketball is a team sport, right? And the tennis is a dance, and the kind of, it's a relationship between the poet and the reader, right? And you don't, but the reader is imagined while in the process of composition. But I mean, and what was Frost, right? The tennis without Frost described free verse as like being like playing tennis without a net.
Interesting.
He wasn't. He was. You can imagine he's not a fan of free verse. But again, I think the tennis is a natural sort of coefficient of poetry.
if you're a tennis player and a poet.
Is there such a thing as? I'm teasing. Yes.
No, it's very funny. I've had several accidents on tennis courts, running over balls that I shouldn't be running from. But I have trouble walking after 10 blocks, but I still play tennis all the time. People can't understand it. I say,
I
"You don't
understand it.
You're in another world.
I understand it.
You do the best you can.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can't give it.
Tennis is life.
And it is like a day. It's like basketball.
You like basketball?
I like the Knicks, I like basketball.
Oh,
One more.
sure, yeah.
I was just curious, you mentioned, or during the intro, that your last book won the Pulitzer in 2015, and this one is coming out 2024, 2023, I'm not sure when. It's a long time between the two. Can you talk about about that? Is that something that you?
I had kids to raise. Yeah, I had to take care of my babies. But I did write another book in between there. So there was the memoir, memoir in essays, which I wrote mostly here in this building, yeah. And that came out in 2018. So I wasn't idle. I get really self-conscious over here.
Aren't you a teacher? Aren't you teaching also?
I'm teaching, I'm raising babies, I mean, come on. Yeah, my wife helps out too. Yes.
You made me realize what I love about poetry.
What's that?
I always read the New Yorker. I definitely read all the cartoons and I read all the poems. I make it through maybe to a story or two,
Right.
but a poem tells a story.
Yes.
You have
Yes,
a
it does.
story right there on the page.
Yeah.
I read your poem that you just had in there.
Yeah.
It's a whole story. I don't have to spend an hour and read it out.
Well, and one of the many popular definitions of poetry is that it is the economy of language.
Right.
Right, and it does all of that work. Right, in an economical and graceful way. There's also a play. The other theater selfie poem that I did not read is a one-act play. I've never written a play before, but poets are both tennis players and playwrights as well. That's the other thing of it. And so I thought, I wanted to explore what natural gifts I might have for playwriting as a poet. I don't have natural gifts.
Oh.
But so poetry can there's narrative poetry, can tell a story. There's lyric poetry, can create an entire kind of somatic bodily experience. There's dramatic poetry, which can give you a sense of the other, right? Connection to community and other people, sense of intimacy. So yeah, poetry is powerful stuff.
Well, thank you so much.
My pleasure.